don't think I ever got that in all of my travels. If anything, they were always extra.
Yeah, like Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
Very extra.
Speaking of extra. Speaking of being super hospitable.
A bit too friendly.
Yeah.
Tell that story
A bit differently. Yeah, I will tell that story. Yeah. Speaking of extra. In Mongolia, I must have been 2 to 3 weeks in the Altai Mountains, hiking, again, solo, unsupported. And I remember coming across a concrete hut in the distance. And you're in the middle of nowhere, you know, you're high up in the plateau there effectively. And I remember seeing a hut, and it looked like the track that I was on runs right by theirs. And I was like, oh yes, you know, if they're in, which I could see that they were in because there's smoke coming out the chimney, then maybe I can get inside and, you know, have some hot tea, because it was about -15 at this point, -10, -15. And they were in, and I rocked up, and they were, you know, a nice family. They were a Kazakh family that I learned living in Mongolia. That's very common. They invited me inside. They gave me a seat. They gave me some hot Kazakh chai, which I love the Kazakh chai out there. It's kind of like very sweet, just what I needed, you know. Some snacks, and about 45 minutes went by. And I remember thinking I should get ready to leave now, because this is normally it'd be only 15-20 minutes usually. Right. I remember thinking this was extra long just because I was super happy to be there, you know, and converse with locals, even though that was hand gestures and like drawing in the sand. And as I went to tell the guy at the hut, like, it's time for me to go, I just saw him looking at me like weird. You know, strange, like he's thinking something and thinking, what the fuck? And then he looks to his wife, he looks back at me, and then I'm looking to his wife. And right there and then, all in hand gestures, he linked his 2 fingers, pointed at me and his wife, and then pointed to the bed.
Okay.
And it took me a few seconds to realise what I was trying to. Yeah, that didn't cross my mind straight away. I was thinking, oh, is he? What was that? What?
Saying sleep on the bed,
then
maybe?
Yeah. And then it the penny dropped. And I was like, no. And I looked at him. I remember looking at her, and it was that sort of awkward because I didn't know what to. Yeah. Like, of course, I was going to say no, but I didn't know how to say no.
What was her expression? I want to know what she was doing.
Just another day at the office. Another day at the office is what she was thinking.
You were like, no. She was like, yeah.
She was just pressing her kid, and she was
like, please take me as well. Like,
get me out of here.
It was like she was used to that. It was just like, I am happy to please. And I remember, just exchanging looks with a pair of them. This probably went on for a number of seconds, and I just put on a fake laugh then, you know, like. And then he didn't laugh straight away, and a few seconds in, he laughed, and you know, I looked at my watch, I stood up and made a swift exit, thanked him for his time and his extra hospitality, and she continued to breastfeed her child, and I made an exit, walking through the outside thinking, fucking hell, was that a wife offering? Or were they now laughing and taking the piss?
Yeah.
Thinking, I thought we were serious. Who knows?
Yeah.
What was worse then, malaria or the Mongolian heat stroke?
Oh, that's a good one. I think in terms of severity, maybe the Madagascar one was worse because...
Did you feel worse, or in retrospect?
I felt worse in the Gobi Desert.
Right.
Because my mindset was a case of, there's no water, I'm fucked, I'm 4 days away, I might die. That was but with malaria, I didn't know what I had. I was just walking through the jungle, getting worse and worse. And then it was only when I arrived, the doctor said, if you arrived here a few hours later, you would have slipped into a coma. And that's when I realised, fuck, I was probably closer to death with malaria than in the Gobi Desert.
That makes sense.
That's insane, man.
But
that's actually crazy.
In terms of pain, I think the fucking Gobi Desert. And I say that all the time. But I do remember after catching malaria, with that, I wasn't upset. I was just, I think it was the pills that I was on, you know, the medication in order to clear the malaria that I had. They did something, they really sort of turned me negative, dark, borderline evil.
So are you saying did it change your hormones?
It wasn't that, it was once I reached the doctor and she gave me new medication to fight it. Right. It almost lasted, it took about 8 days for the malaria to be fully cleared out of my system. But I remember for 3 or 4 of those days being like really angry, really frustrated, evil thoughts, hated the locals, hated the country. But it was almost flipped. I used it as fire. It wasn't a case of get me the fuck out of here. You know, I still, this was 1 month into a 5-month journey, and I still wasn't thinking of stopping or quitting. It was more of like I'm going to fucking smash this expedition, conquer this island, and then bounce. You know, after a few days, I came about and I was normal again, and, you know, I loved the locals, and I really do, and the island, I love it. But I just remember those weird thoughts, dark thoughts that I had.
Hot or cold?
Love it. There we go. I predicted it. I think I've experienced both, and on my recent trip following the Great Wall of China, which is crazy because it wasn't a world first, it wasn't a mission. It was something for TV where I was stupid and said, yes, I will swim across that river for like 300 to 500 meters, 20 minutes almost in this cold river.
Wow.
Air temperature was -12.
Okay.
It was a stupid thing to do, but I thought, well, I've walked the Yangtze. This is only a little swim, and I've got a film crew with me, so I'm safe. You know? And so I swam across it, and holy shit, my body just something happened that I hadn't experienced before, and I was shaking. My vision was going. By the time I got up and they pulled me back onto the boat, I couldn't dry myself. Sounds like I'm hitting on them. I'm not. I had 2 girls there, and they needed to dry me. And then they were trying to tow this guy who was there on a sheep raft, and I was like, "Fucking forget the guy. He's got a paddle with him. He can paddle his way back. Leave him, ditch him." And they took me back, and I was shaking. My whole body was red, other than my face, because my face hadn't touched the water.
Wow.
And at that point, I couldn't find my way to the bus. A guy literally had to throw another towel over me and drag me to the bus. And from then on, I remember I was almost about to faint or black out, and I really had to fight it. I was shaking it. I was trying to wake up my body and stay alert. Vision was blurry, and I remember thinking, holy shit. And I was in a bus now. This was warm, and no one could be in there longer than like 4 or 5 minutes because it was too hot. And I had hot water, and I was spilling it all over me trying to drink it. And I remember thinking I probably skipped stage 1, 2, and 3 of hypothermia.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
when
sounds like it.
yeah. And that's when I realized, wow, so that can take you fast, but in the heat, yes, you become delirious and you kind of hallucinate, but you feel every bit of pain. You feel every bit of fucking agony. Like almost crawling on your fingernails across the desert floor, just feeling how dry your insides are. Like your organs drying up, and there's with hypothermia, when you die of hypothermia, the victims of hypothermia are found with their hats and gloves and scarves off, because before they die or before they sleep, they start thinking that they're warm,
they're really
you know?
warm,
And so there's kind of this euphoric feeling to it. You don't get that in the desert. You do not get that in the desert. You feel every bit of pain.
Wow.
So I think if I was going to die in the heat or cold, I think I'd prefer the cold.
Now let's talk about Yangtze, the Yangtze mission, 352 days, 4,000 miles.
That's the one.
That was. You always say Madagascar was like the one that really was the hardest in terms of all the stuff you had to go to. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah.
But how was the Yangtze then compared to the other 2?
Yeah, the Yangtze was just a different beast altogether. I really don't think I anticipated it to be that difficult. And you know, to break down some of the difficulties. The first attempt to find the source of the Yangtze. This was the true and scientific source of the Yangtze, only mapped in 2009. Yeah, 2009.
Wow.
Which is crazy to think. And it was the same guy that mapped the traditional source. It's just he was then partnered up with NASA, and he was able to correct his wrong and then find the true and scientific source. And so before we got there, we had already lost 4 members of the team. Due to altitude sickness, fear of wildlife. Like, they were fine, they abandoned the trip, and then it was a first failed attempt of the source. And a day before we reached it, I had a Tibetan guide with me, and he was there as a local to help translate, but also there to help me get off the mountains in case I got altitude sickness. But it reversed, and he got altitude sickness, and I needed to get him off the mountains. And so that set me back another 2 weeks because I needed to regroup with a stronger team. And so already we've not even made it to day 1. It's been 4 days trying to get to day 1 of the 352 day, and we've lost 4 members, and I've not even started.
Yeah.
You know, and then we get to the source, and we are following this trickle the Yangtze River, but it's literally just a trickle. It's crazy to think that it's so small you can step over it.
Wow.
But where it pours into the East China Sea, it's almost 10 miles wide, and you've got cruise liners
10 miles
Yeah.
wide.
almost 10 miles wide,
That's amazing.
which is
Holy
insane. And here I am, like, scooping, drinking from it, stepping over it.
That's cool.
Yet
That's
4,000
amazing.
miles from now, it's going to be fucking huge.
It's pretty amazing. You literally saw it every step
Yeah.
of the journey.
Yeah.
It slowly increase.
Honestly, I
volume.
swear there was some sort of bond with the Yangtze, because I did see it from its little trickle,
Yeah.
from its infancy, and just saw it grow and grow and get bigger. The different sort of villages and communities to towns to cities through all of the different provinces, and I saw it being, neglected in a way and vandalized in a way, and just abused in many ways along the way too. It was weird. And it was the way that I was in China, right, and they love dragons, and I remember it was one interview that I did, and it is really what I felt, but I was almost had to describe it to them in a way that the Yangtze was like a dragon, because it kept chewing up and spitting out every member that joined me, up to when I was 6 weeks in. Of the 16 people that joined me, 10 of those just couldn't last.
Wow.
Fucking hell, man.
And I was just constantly being battered by the Yangtze, and that was the first time I was on the phone, satellite communications with my dad. I had been threatened with deportation by the Tibetan police, who had taken me in and questioned me at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I had already faced 5 police encounters. It was dropping into -20, well on its way to -40. I was over 5,100 meters altitude, which is similar altitude to Mount Everest base camp. There were wolves, and it was now closing into bear hunting season. So as they're looking for calories before they go into torpor, which is their version of hibernation. Lost loads of members. Had my team on the phone saying abort the expedition, try again next year. And it was at that point, with all of this craziness, I was on the phone to my dad, and that was the first time I said to him and to myself, what the fuck am I doing? What am I doing? I really had to dig deep. And whilst I was on the phone to him, the police didn't drop me back where they picked me up from.
Oh, yeah.
They drove me 20 miles back on myself
Wow.
to where there was a bridge, and they said, this is Tibet, that is Qinghai, I don't want to see you in Tibet again. It was all bollocks. And I had to cross the bridge, but we had Castor Choi, the horse, that the film crew ditched us with. the horse was there for the film crew, and they were like, fuck this. There was a bear walking around right where they were, like a day before, and a local had told them that, and they were spooked, and they were like, we didn't sign up for bears, we're done. And they literally left 3 days before we made the source of the Yangtze.
Wow.
And so all of this madness just got to me, and so we had to drop one guide off, and then the police dropped me 20 miles back. So this guy has to, Tudor his name was, he had to navigate his way back, just follow the river back, but he had to run 20 miles, gallop 20 miles. I'm sure it was in only a couple of hours before sunset, and he had no food, no tent. He had to do it, he had to make it. And I remember all of this going on, and it's over crazy terrain as well. And I was just on the phone thinking, what the fuck am I doing? I've got 350 days left. I'm on day 6. It was insane.
Yeah.
It was just insane. So I do say Madagascar, pound for pound, I think there was no day's rest with Madagascar. It was 155 days. But there was crocodile-infested rivers, there was the deadliest strain of malaria, there was being held at gunpoint by the military, there was avoiding the bandits, there was hunting and gathering through the jungle, there was the chicken called Gertrude, there was spider bites that infected, there were leeches that I had to physically pry off my skin and flick them out the tent. I don't think there was a day in Madagascar that was just that was a nice day's hike. None of that. And that was the same with the Yangtze, but the Yangtze did ease up. The dragon was eventually tamed, domesticated, stopped spitting people out, and people could join me.
I want to go back in time a little bit to when you contrasted your Mongolia trip, where everything was solo, you're on your own, to now in Madagascar with guides, and especially your relationship with me. And when I was reading,
I didn't know you.
you?
were
no, I was,
It's like the rush hour scene where he's like, you.
You know me.
when I was reading your book, I don't know why, but I got a very big feeling that it's similar to, if you've ever read the book, we read it in school, of Mice and Men, where the main two characters, George and Lenny, are very different in their like characteristics, in how they go about their lives.
Right.
But together, subconsciously, they almost work off of each other and need each other without realizing. And to me, that was like the epitome of your relationship with me, where you would drive each other insane, but at the end of the day, it was, you were feeding off each other's energy.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if, like, now in any other adventures you've been on, or what you're looking for in the future, is this something that is actually quite valuable to you?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, and you're right. Looking back, although he frustrated the fuck out of me, he became my brother, effectively, my Malagasy brother, and we still keep in touch on Facebook.
That's cool.
Really?
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
we still
beautiful.
keep in touch. I then went out. I led a trip for charity challenge.
That must have been
was-
surreal.
that
I was
was
going to
cool.
ask you about that. That must
Yeah,
have been surreal, yeah.
And you know, everyone gave him a big sort of generous tip at the end of it, and all of the porters, and I felt like that was good. That's me doing my bit, giving back. They supported me. Now I'm trying to support them in return. And yeah, he was an alcoholic, and he was very scared of the south. No one really goes south. It's warned against it. And as we were traveling down south from the capital, we would come across buses that had bullet holes in and was set on fire. You know, people die every day down south. Not supposed to say that as tourism ambassador, but maybe avoid the south slightly of Madagascar. And so he would get scared of the bandits, but we would sort of seek out communities, and the sheriff of the community, sounds old school, doesn't it? But the sheriffs of the communities would advise us where they think the bandits are. But he had in his mind that the bandits would kill him, take me, and hold me ransom to get money from the government. And a lot of the time he would then end up drinking through the fear, and then he would end up crying and saying these, you know, he would communicate to me in English how I'm going to die and how
We
he's
suffer
going to
more
die.
in imagination than in reality. Is
Yeah.
it that comes to
Yeah,
mind?
right.
Yeah.
And so he had a right to be fearful, but it was almost like the alcohol made him 10 times worse, and that was horrible for me as a Western to be there, knowing that I need guides that can support and sort of help me through this mentally and physically, and he just couldn't until he could. You know, it was very much like that until I got used to his shit, and I was just like, here we go again. But then the next day, you know, he'd apologise. Oh man, I had too much to drink, and then he would laugh about it and be like, yeah, you know, just hydrate. And then we would crack on. But yeah, it was one of those whereby it got to a point where I got a different guide called Joe for the middle section, and me had to go home, but he didn't want to stay. But I was on a budget and I didn't have money to pay him. I was like, well, you can't stay because I don't have money. He was like, I will join you for free, because he just like bonded with me. He was having a bit of an adventure himself. He was facing like certain scenarios which he was like, oh my god, I think this is a little bit fun. And he took to it, and I really liked having him there with me. And it was actually Joe was the one that he kept saying Kinjanin to me. Every time he got annoyed with me, he said Kinjanin, which means motherfucker in Malagasy. And I figured that out. And he was a bit of a pain, he was. And I sent him home. Yeah, he fucked me. I've never had to send anyone home.
Yeah.
Just because they've annoyed me. But Joe was the guy that annoyed me, and I sent him home. And you know,
He's the kindred.
yeah, I kept saying it once I learned. I was like, "You're kindred," and then it was just me and me again. Yeah, so we were solid.
That's crazy.
That's a great story.
That's really good.
That's amazing.